The human princess was missing, but her crown was still warm. Sunlight moved across the marble floor in slow bands, and the tapestries hung silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Servants crossed the great hall in a careful hush, their footsteps loud in the quiet. When the chamberlain lifted the velvet cushion, the crown lay there, metal bright, jewels catching the light. It was not cold. The metal had the small, dull heat of something recently worn, like a cup left on a table after tea. That detail spread through the palace faster than a rumor. The crown was warm. No one knew how to place the meaning of that warmth. It was comfort and shock at once. Some said it meant the princess had strolled from the chamber only moments before, leaving the crown behind. Others said it was a sign of something more urgent and strange. Princess Alara was known for never being far from her crown when she could help it. She preferred to wear it during ceremonies and private meetings alike, its weight a small but steady reminder of her duty. She loved the crown because it felt like a promise to her people and to herself that she would carry the future with care. To find it warm and the princess gone made people imagine many things, and none of them easy. The first who noticed the crown were the personal attendants, a small, steady circle of humans who lived on the rhythm of the princess's days. They had been preparing tea and charts, polishing instruments for a delegation arriving that afternoon. They called for the chamberlain and then for the captain of the palace guard. The captain, a woman named Rhea, moved with the calm of someone used to solving problems by simple steps. Observe, record, secure. She closed the chamber doors, ordered the servants to wait outside, and looked for any sign of forced entry or odd footprints. There were none. The windows were latched. The balcony was untouched. Alara's bed was made, not messy as one would expect if she had been taken in the night. Her personal things were in order. The small, personal star map she kept beside her bed, an old paper chart from Earth, creased at the corners, was gone. A loose thread on her sleeve had been clipped, as if someone had removed it carefully and with skill. A single hair lay on the pillow, golden as the morning, and someone wrapped it in tissue and placed it in a small glass jar for later tests. The palace had many eyes and many hands, and yet none had seen the princess leave. By noon, the news had reached the council. Envoys from other worlds waited in the lower galleries, their faces unreadable beneath strange fabrics and cooling helmets. The human ambassador spoke quickly, his words clipped to avoid panic. "We will check every route," he said. "We will not let fear rule us." But fear had already taken a shape in the minds of many. The princess had been stolen. Princess Alara was not a figurehead. Though the crown sat light on her brow, she carried influence that was harder to carve into law. She had a mind that bent questions into new shapes and an energy that pulled stubborn systems into motion. She had won debates with representatives of the mining guilds and the science academies. She wrote letters to captains at distant ports and to farmers on planets where the soil remembered different suns. She had friends among engineers, librarians, and the old storytellers who still traded tales in the market squares. She had enemies too, quiet ones who disliked her reforms, louder ones who resented the truth of a human monarchy standing strong in a galaxy that loved to measure things by power. It was not a mystery that someone might want to remove her. The mystery was how. Outside the palace walls, the city moved under the news like a patient body in the first stages of fever. People closed windows and shops. Aircars that usually hummed in neat lanes left empty trails across the sky. The markets grew thin, and the children stared as if of all the stories they had been told, the one that mattered now had come true. The royal guard set up checkpoints along the main routes. Drones combed the lower alleys. Sensors in the harbor pinged for unusual emissions. The search was thorough. It was also human. Humans had a way of looking at puzzles that was not always neat. Where many species preferred to wait and calculate, humans moved with a kind of impatient creativity. They tried solutions that were messy and brilliant. They soldered together devices from leftover parts. They used humor in meetings where silence would have been polite. They asked questions that were too direct to be polite, and often those questions found answers. The search for Alara quickly filled with these small human things. An engineer who asked a smuggler for an offhand favor and got, in return, an odd lead. A botanist who remembered a rare pollen sample that matched a trace found in the princess's room. A message board where citizens posted small observations. An unfamiliar ship hovering over the river at dawn. a merchant who remembered a girl in a hood who paid for a drink with strange coins. Rhea assembled a team not from the highest ranks, but from those who worked closely with the princess, those who could read her habits and her silences. There was Jonah, a technician who had built half the palace's sensors. Myra, a quiet linguist who loved old earth poetry and could find patterns others missed. Terk, a pilot whose hands were as sure on a control stick as his words were sharp in a crowded room. They did not call themselves heroes. They were a crew who loved their country and the woman who wore the crown. They began with the crown. Jonah lifted it with gloved hands and ran a quick diagnostic through his portable reader. The crown hummed with a faint energy signature that did not match any known engine type. It had a trace of the palace's internal network, yes, but overlaid with something else, an old, low-band signal that the palace network did not use. Jonah frowned. "This isn't from a ship," he said. "It's a thing that lived between clocks." He meant it as a joke, because humans use jokes to keep from frightening themselves, but the words hung in the room. They followed the trace outward, using the palace's sensors as the first net. The signal had been brief and pointed, a kind of beacon that told of an approach and then silence. Where it had come from, Jonah could not be sure. The palace had logs of trade lanes and ship movements and the faces of those who passed by. The traces in the logs were small and confused, like footprints in powder after wind. The team grew patient. They looked not just at engines and lanes, but at small things. The pattern of dust on a balcony rail, the way the curtains in a neighbor's window moved at night, the report of a fisherman who saw a light that made the stars wobble. It was Myra who noticed the pattern in the tiny things. She sat for hours with the star map, tracing routes with an unhurried finger. She listened to old songs Alara liked and watched for a joke the princess would tell when nervous. She asked quietly what Alara would think of the heat in the crown. She would think someone needed help, Myra said, and the rest of the team felt the direction of her thought like a gust. The trace did not lead to a classic crime. There were no calls for ransom, no stamped demands sent to the palace, only a silence in the places that usually answered when trouble came. That silence was a different kind of answer. It told them that this was not a simple theft. It suggested design. It suggested a test. The idea felt too large to be comfortable. Someone was watching not to take, but to see what humanity would do. Back in the palace, counselors argued in circles. Some urged the use of a show of force, lock the borders and send the fleet to skim the edges of the galaxy. Others favored a quiet diplomacy, reach out to old allies, open channels to the neighboring systems, ask for help. Alara, when she declared her positions, had always chosen courage made sensible. Her methods were a patchwork of mercy and iron, of stubborn questions that forced change. If someone was testing humanity, it seemed likely they wanted to see that patchwork in motion. The team decided to do what humans did best when confronted with riddles. They improvised. They repurposed a fishing skiff with extra shielding and a small sensor array. They dressed it with the colors of common traders. They sent Terk to fly it along the old river route where a fisherman had reported the wobbling light. Terk joked as he strapped in, "We go looking like we're not looking." The joke helped. Humans use jokes to make fear manageable, to keep the worst pieces of themselves from breaking. The skiff found nothing dramatic, only a thin trail of energy that matched the signature Jonah had seen in the crown. It led not to a shipyard or an enemy outpost, but to a tucked-away cove where old trade vessels took shelter from the storms. There in the wind-blown sand they found a small object half buried. It was not a weapon. It was not a device designed for travel. It looked at first glance like a child's toy, carved from a metal that dimmed the light, with smooth edges and a tiny aperture that blinked like a watch. When Jonah picked it up, the device warmed in his hand. It gave off a quiet, almost polite hum, and a tiny display flashed a single word in no known tongue. Myra stared and then laughed softly, the laugh that came when pattern and chance met. She took out her notebook, compared the script to the lines on the star map, and found a match in an old trade symbol. The device, whatever it was a marker. Someone had left a sign in a language that no longer had government buildings or fleets, a language used by small traders who lived in the spaces between systems. It was human enough to be that kind of language, and odd enough to be something else at the same time. They did not know who had left the marker. They knew only that the princess's crown had been near it. They knew that the trace led outward. and they began to suspect that whatever force had taken Alara, or whoever had convinced her to go, was testing humans in a way that required them to get clever. The warmth of the crown suggested the princess had not been taken by simple violence. It suggested she had been led somewhere or lured or invited. That warmth was like a handprint left on the world. It suggested presence. It suggested intention. At night, when the city lights hummed low and the palace settled into a restless sleep, Rhea walked the outer gardens and thought like a soldier and a friend. Tests did not usually have rules. When they did, they were hard to read. Rhea thought of how Alara had rewired the mountain settlement's water system when the pipes froze last winter. She thought of the way Alara had sat with small children in a refugee quarter and let them teach her the names of the constellations in a dialect older than the treaties. Whoever had the princess had drawn someone who did not run from difficulty. Whoever had the crown had proven something about their thinking by leaving it warm and close. The people of the palace slept poorly that night, some with eyes open, some with mouths shaping questions they would not say aloud. The city outside moved through the long hours like a patient held at attention. In the quiet, small lights blinked in distant markets, and ships set courses with hushed engines. The crown sat wrapped in a thin cloth inside a locked case, inside a room with officers on guard. It kept its little heat as if it were embarrassed to be noticed. By dawn, a new plan began to take shape. It would not be a loud plan. It would not be a plan that stormed the skies. It would be the slow, human thing that built bridges out of small parts. Questions asked in the right order, a borrowed favor from an old trader, a child's memory of a lullaby sung by a sailor who once spoke of a lantern in the dark. They would follow the trail that wind and light and the absence of violence suggested, outward and sideways, into the spaces where the galaxy's soft corners showed themselves. They would look for the place that liked puzzles more than power. They would go because the princess was missing and because their crown, warm and small, had been left where someone could see it, and yet where no one could be blamed outright. The ship moved quietly through the darkness of space, its engines low and steady, humming a soft rhythm. That matched the pulse of the crew. Outside, the stars were cold points of light, distant and unmoving, yet full of possibility. Princess Alara's crown, still warm, was carefully packed in a protective container at the center of the ship. Jonah, Myra, and Terk sat around the navigation console, each focused on their part, yet each aware of the unspoken weight of the mission. They were not just following a signal, they were following hope. The trail that had begun in the palace now led outward into uncharted systems, places where maps ended and rumors began. Jonah ran his fingers along the sensor panels, adjusting frequencies to catch the faintest hints of energy. He had learned from Alara that even the smallest irregularity could mean something important. Myra's hands hovered over her tablet, translating signals into patterns she could read, patterns that looked like a language of shapes more than words. Terk's eyes scanned the viewport, watching for anything that moved unnaturally, for light where there should be none. They had encountered their first obstacle almost immediately. A belt of asteroids, denser than expected, stretched across their path. The larger vessels in the galaxy would have gone around, taking extra days, but humans were not content to wait. Terk adjusted the controls with precise, confident movements, weaving the ship between spinning rocks. The crew held their breath as the vessel tilted, then corrected, then spun slightly to avoid a fragment that might have shredded the hull. Myra let out a small laugh, startling the others. "I almost forgot how much fun it is when we don't crash." Jonah shook his head but smiled. Fun is one way to put it, death by rock is another. Even in danger there was humor. It was human. It kept the fear from consuming them entirely. Once through the belt, the trail continued along a faint energy signature, one so subtle that it could have been mistaken for a natural anomaly. The signal pulsed intermittently, almost as if it were testing their perception. Myra studied the readings and noticed a pattern in the intervals. "It's not random," she said. "Look. The pulses are timed to the spin of the star nearby. Someone or something wants to be found, but only if we're paying attention." They followed the signal through several small systems, each more strange than the last. The planets they passed were unlike the familiar colonies humans had built. One world was a vast desert with blue sand that shifted like liquid under a thin wind. Another was a frozen lake world, ice stretching in geometric shapes that mirrored the satellites orbiting above. Terk maneuvered the ship close to the surfaces, scanning for structures or signs of life. Each scan showed nothing obvious, yet the signal persisted. Someone was leaving breadcrumbs, and the breadcrumb trail was deliberately tricky. During the long hours of travel, the crew spoke of Alara. Not of fear, not of loss, but of the way she approached problems, the way she had always believed that humans could make a difference. Jonah recounted a story from the palace gardens, when Alara had spent an entire morning convincing a stubborn botanist to plant seeds in an unlikely pattern. And by evening, the arrangement had grown into a small, self-sustaining ecosystem. Myra remembered Alara sitting in the library, reading aloud ancient stories of explorers who had crossed deserts and oceans and stars, not for conquest, but for understanding. Even Terk, usually quiet, admitted that Alara's courage had once saved his life during a training exercise gone wrong. Their memories were not sentimental, they were strategy. They reminded the crew of what Alara represented: resourcefulness, adaptability, and the belief that humans could turn the improbable into possible. They would need all of that now. As they entered a particularly dark region between two star systems, the sensors picked up an anomaly unlike anything they had encountered. It was a faint, pulsing mass of energy, spherical in shape, surrounded by a faint shimmer that distorted light. Jonah's eyes widened. This isn't natural, it's a construct or a station, something alive in a sense. Myra's voice was calm, but her fingers trembled slightly over her tablet. The pulse frequency matches the crown. Whoever built this, they've been following us as much as we've been following them. Terk adjusted the ship's shields, approaching cautiously. The closer they came, the stronger the hum of the crown became. It was as if the crown recognized the station, or perhaps the station recognized the crown. Neither of them spoke the thought aloud. They did not need to. They docked carefully, the ship connecting with a port that seemed almost organic, smooth, and metallic, yet alive with faint, rhythmic vibrations. The doors opened slowly, revealing a vast corridor lined with structures that shimmered like glass, yet had no seams. The light was soft, golden, and impossible to trace to a source. The corridor curved naturally, and as they moved through it, the walls seemed to adjust slightly, guiding their steps. Myra observed quietly. "It's aware of us. This place reacts to our presence." Jonah nodded. "It's testing us, not just our brains, our instincts, our humanity." The first test came quickly. The corridor split into 3 paths, each one glowing faintly with symbols. Each symbol was a puzzle in its own right. A star pattern that needed alignment, a set of lines that formed a map if traced correctly, a simple code that only made sense if read aloud with rhythm. The crew paused. These were not traps in the normal sense. They were questions. Questions in a language humans had not seen before, yet questions they could understand if they thought like humans, creative, adaptive, observant. Terk chose the middle path, instinct guiding him. Jonah adjusted the alignment of the star pattern along the walls, twisting the symbols until they matched a configuration Alara had once used in a tactical game. Myra read the code aloud, following the rhythm of her breath and heartbeat. One by one, the doors along the paths opened, each with a soft hum, acknowledging their success. As they advanced deeper, they encountered signs of others who had been here before. Objects left behind, partially completed puzzles, devices that seemed to function like messages. The station, if it could be called that, was alive in a strange sense. Aware, observant, judging, and perhaps learning. Hours passed, and the tests grew harder. At one point, they entered a room with a pool of liquid that reflected not only their images but possible outcomes of their choices. Jonah saw himself making a mistake. Terk saw a door closing behind them. Myra saw herself lost in the corridors. The reflections shifted, teasing them, asking questions without words. They realized quickly that hesitation would lead nowhere. They had to act, not just think. It was Myra who noticed the pattern first. The reflections, they're echoes of the crown's warmth. They're leading us, not trapping us. The crew adjusted their path accordingly, following the subtle heat patterns detected by Jonah's portable sensors. The crown acted like a compass, pointing them forward with a faint pulse. Step by step, corridor by corridor, they moved deeper into the heart of the station. Eventually, they reached a chamber unlike the rest. It was open, vast, and shaped like a sphere within the sphere of the station. The walls were smooth and reflective, but faint images swirled within them, images of planets, stars, and people moving across worlds. In the center of the chamber, standing quietly and looking out toward a faint light source, was Princess Alara. She turned at the sound of the doors opening, a smile on her face that was calm and certain. She had not been harmed, she had not been frightened. Instead, she seemed as though she had expected them all along. The warmth of the crown was gone from the container. It had returned to her, resting lightly on her head. "You found me," she said simply, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Myra stepped forward, unable to hide her relief. "Alara, we thought you would come," Alara finished. "Yes, I was part of the test. This station, its creators wanted to see what humans would do. They did not expect persistence, creativity, and cooperation." Jonah shook his head in disbelief. "A test, all this, but why?" Alara gestured to the swirling images on the walls. "This station observes and evaluates species across the galaxy. They judge by action, by thought, by the choices we make under pressure. They believe that intelligence is measured by survival, but true intelligence, true worth is measured by how a species responds to challenge, by how it creates solutions where none seem possible." Terk let out a low whistle. "They really underestimated humans." Alara's smile widened. "They did, and they learned that humans are not so easily measured. They value life, ingenuity, and compassion. They will test again, but this time they will do so knowing that humanity can meet impossible odds." The chamber seemed to vibrate subtly, acknowledging her words. The walls shimmered, displaying scenes of their journey. The asteroid belt, the desert world, the frozen lake world, the puzzles in the corridors. Every choice they had made, every risk they had taken was now visible. And yet there was no accusation, no threat, only recognition. Alara walked to them, placing her hands on Jonah and Myra's shoulders. "We must return. We have passed this part of the test, but the galaxy is vast, and our work is only beginning. There are others who will watch, who will challenge, who will need to see that humans are more than what appearances suggest." Terk nodded. "And they will see. They've already learned something today." Alara looked at the crown, resting lightly on her head, its warmth a reminder of what had guided them. "Yes," she said, "they have learned, but more importantly, we have proven something to ourselves. We are capable, we are resourceful. We are human." The crew left the chamber, hearts lifted but minds alert. The station's corridors seemed less threatening now, almost guiding them outward. The tests had been challenging, but they had not broken. Instead, they had grown stronger, smarter, more united. They had discovered not just the path to Alara, but the strength that humans carried with them. Strength not measured by weapons or fleets, but by creativity, courage, and compassion. As they docked the ship once more and prepared to return to familiar space, the stars outside seemed brighter, closer, as if acknowledging the small group that had moved through danger and emerged wiser. Princess Alara looked out the viewport, her gaze steady. She was back among her people, but her thoughts were already moving outward, toward the galaxy and the challenges it held. The warmth of her crown was no longer a mystery. It had guided them, marked their path, and confirmed the truth that humans carried within them. They could face uncertainty and emerge victorious, not because of strength alone, but because of heart, mind, and unity. The journey was far from over. The galaxy was full of mysteries, challenges, and tests, but the first step had been taken, and the humans who had taken it had proven that when the universe presented a puzzle, humanity would not simply wait. Humanity would solve it. The ship moved steadily through the void, leaving the strange station behind. The stars stretched endlessly in every direction, familiar yet distant, calm yet full of hidden danger. Princess Alara sat in the command seat, her fingers lightly brushing the controls. She was quiet, not out of fear or doubt, but because she was thinking. Every choice they had made, every puzzle they had solved, had led them here, but the universe held more than one test. She could feel it in the hum of the ship, in the subtle vibrations of the crown on her head, and in the alert expressions of her team. Jonah, Myra, and Terk worked without speaking, each absorbed in their own instruments. Jonah's eyes flicked across the sensors, reading the faint signals left behind by the station. Myra traced patterns of light and energy, noticing small anomalies that others would have missed. Terk's hands never left the controls, adjusting the ship's course with the precision of someone who had learned to trust instinct. Even in the quiet, the crew was moving in perfect synchronization. The bond between them had strengthened through trials, and now they were ready for what came next. It was not long before the signal returned. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, it pulsed in rhythm with the crown. The source was far beyond the mapped regions of the galaxy. The signal was deliberate, persistent, and full of subtle information, hints of obstacles, of dangers, of decisions to come. Alara studied it, her mind working like a finely tuned instrument. "It's a path," she said, "not a trap. Someone or something wants us to follow, but they are testing us in a way that is different from before. This is about choice, about judgment." The first obstacle came quickly. A system appeared on the sensors, filled with floating debris and strange magnetic storms. Entire planets seemed missing, replaced by fields of scattered rock and glowing energy. The crew debated the safest route. One path curved around the storm, longer but safer. Another cut through the center, faster but unpredictable. Alara's decision was immediate, through the storm. Humans thrived under challenge. They adapted, improvised, and persevered. Terk adjusted the controls with a practiced hand, weaving the ship through the shifting fields. Lightning-like energy arced across the rocks, illuminating the debris in fleeting flashes. The ship rocked violently, alarms sounding and lights flickering, yet they moved steadily forward. Jonah monitored the shields, adjusting for changes in the magnetic fields. Myra kept her focus on the signal, noting that each pulse grew stronger as they approached the center. Hours passed in tense concentration. The storm tested every skill the crew had, demanding not just precision but intuition. At one point, a massive rock rotated suddenly, blocking their path entirely. Terk reacted instantly, turning the ship sharply, scraping past the edges of the rock. A small explosion shook the hull, but no one panicked. Humans were accustomed to risk, and they trusted one another implicitly. By the time they cleared the storm, they were exhausted but triumphant. The next challenge was subtler. A planet appeared on the sensors, lush and green, seemingly peaceful. But as they approached, the environment changed. The trees moved unnaturally as though alive, and the winds carried whispers that sounded almost like voices. Jonah studied the readings. "It's a psychological field," he said. "It's not harmful physically, but it's trying to confuse us, to make us doubt ourselves and each other." Myra closed her eyes and breathed slowly, recalling stories Alara had read aloud during long nights in the palace. Stories of explorers who relied on trust and observation, who solved problems by looking for patterns others overlooked. "Focus on what is real," she said quietly, "not what it wants us to see." They moved forward cautiously. The whispers grew louder, forming patterns that seemed familiar and friendly, yet carried subtle threats. One voice mimicked Terk's, telling him to take the wrong path. Another imitated Jonah, suggesting a false reading on the instruments. Alara remained calm. "Ignore it," she said. "Trust what we know, trust each other, trust the crown." The crown pulsed faintly, as if responding to her resolve. Each crew member felt its warmth, subtle and guiding. Slowly, steadily, they moved across the planet, resisting the illusions until the whispers faded. They had learned that this part of the test was about unity, about relying on human instinct, about recognizing what was real versus what was manipulation. The next trial was different still. A small moon appeared, orbiting a gas giant. Its surface was covered in structures that seemed abandoned but technologically advanced. As they landed, the crew found devices scattered across the ground, each projecting holograms of possible futures. One showed the ship destroyed by a meteor strike. Another displayed the team separated and lost forever. Another depicted Alara captured, the crown taken from her head. The images were not threats, they were lessons. Each showed consequences of choices, but none were inevitable. Alara examined them carefully, understanding that the test required not just courage but foresight, not just action but reasoning. "We can choose our path," she said. "These futures are possibilities, not prophecies. Humans can shape outcomes by thinking, by deciding, by acting." Jonah adjusted the devices, running simulations to see which choices aligned with success. Terk plotted courses that avoided the dangers depicted, while Myra studied the logic behind each hologram. Together, they selected a path that minimized risk while maximizing flexibility. They learned that humans did not merely survive, they calculated, adapted, and turned knowledge into advantage. The final challenge came when they approached the core of the moon. A structure rose from the surface, shaped like a tower of crystal, pulsing with light. It was clearly sentient, responding to their presence. Alara stepped forward, her crown glowing faintly. "This is it," she said. "The source of the tests." The structure communicated not with words but with images and emotions. It showed the history of countless species, some thriving, some extinct, some rising and falling repeatedly. It conveyed the same question repeatedly. What defines a species? What proves worth? Alara understood. Humans were being judged not by strength, not by weapons, not by conquest, but by qualities unique to them: creativity, courage, compassion, adaptability. She spoke aloud, her voice steady. Humans survive because we think, because we care, because we act with purpose and unity. We face challenges not alone, but together. Our worth is in our choices, in our actions, in our hearts and minds. The tower pulsed in response, a light that shifted from harsh white to warm gold. The holograms dissolved, replaced by scenes of Alara and her crew navigating storms, solving puzzles, and resisting illusions. The crown on her head pulsed with the same golden warmth, affirming that they had succeeded. Jonah, Myra, and Terk looked at one another, relief and pride flooding them. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and tests that challenged every skill they possessed. And yet, through it all, they had succeeded, not by force, but by thought, by unity, by humanity. The tower's energy enveloped them, not to trap or harm, but to convey recognition. The station, the storms, the illusions, the holograms, all had been a measure of human potential. They had passed. The crown had guided them, the instincts of the crew had preserved them, and Alara's leadership had ensured success. As they prepared to leave the moon, Alara spoke softly. We have proven ourselves, but the galaxy is vast. There will be more tests, more challenges, more unknowns, but we are ready because we are humans. Terk grinned, adjusting the controls. I'm starting to like these tests as long as we always come out okay. Myra laughed softly. I prefer challenges that don't whisper in my ear, but I'll take them if we do this together. Jonah nodded. We'll always have each other. That's how humans survive and thrive. The ship lifted off, leaving the moon and the sentient tower behind. The stars stretched before them, endless and full of possibilities. The signal from the crown, now faint, guided them toward the next destination. They knew the journey was far from over, but each step had strengthened them, teaching lessons no map or manual could convey. Through storms, illusions, and tests of reason and courage, they had discovered the essence of humanity. It was not merely survival, but the ability to create, to adapt, to care, and to act. Each obstacle had shown them that humans could face the unknown with intelligence, unity, and determination. The warmth of the crown was no longer a mystery. It was a reminder of what they carried within themselves. Alara gazed out at the stars, feeling the pulse of the crown against her brow. The galaxy may test us again, she said, but we have learned that we do not face it alone. We face it as humans, clever, adaptable, and unyielding. As the ship moved into uncharted space, the crew felt a quiet confidence settle over them. They had faced challenges that seemed impossible, and they had overcome them. The warmth of the crown, the bonds between the crew, and the lessons they had learned would guide them forward. The universe was vast and unknown, but humanity was ready to meet it, not with fear, but with courage, creativity, and heart. They were more than survivors. They were humans. And nothing, not storms, not illusions, not tests designed by unknown hands, could change that. The next destination waited, full of mysteries, full of questions, full of challenges. And the crew would meet it head-on, proving once more that humans could thrive, adapt, and succeed, no matter the odds. The stars stretched endlessly outside the ship, calm yet full of mystery. The crew had grown quiet during the long journey, not from fear, but from the weight of what they had learned. Each test, each challenge had prepared them for this moment, the moment when humanity would prove not only its strength, but its worth to the galaxy. Princess Alara sat at the command seat, crown resting lightly on her head, her gaze steady on the uncharted space ahead. She could feel the pulse of the crown, guiding them toward the final trial. Jonah, Myra, and Terk worked as one. Jonah monitored the sensors, analyzing energy patterns and anomalies with careful precision. Myra interpreted signals and patterns that could have gone unnoticed by any other species, seeing connections others could not. Terk adjusted the ship's course with the instinctive confidence of a pilot who had survived every imaginable challenge. The crew had grown closer than ever before, united by shared trials and unwavering trust in one another. The signal they had been following led to a massive, spiraling system of rings around a luminous star. The rings were not ordinary. Each one shimmered with energy, forming paths that shifted and moved as if alive. Small ships had attempted passage before and had never returned. The station that had first tested them had warned of nothing directly, but the Crown's pulse now surged stronger than ever. It was a call and a warning, a beacon of guidance through the final challenge. Alara stood, her presence calm and commanding. "This is the heart of the trial," she said. "Whatever waits ahead, we meet it together. Humans succeed not by avoiding danger, but by understanding it, by adapting, and by remaining united." As they approached the outermost ring, the first obstacle revealed itself, a massive field of energy storms. Lightning-like arcs leapt across the void, twisting and bending unpredictably. Sensors overloaded and lights flickered. Jonah leaned over the console, rerouting power and stabilizing shields. "We need to move carefully," he said. "One wrong move and the storms will tear us apart." Terk's hands moved quickly over the controls, weaving the ship through the shifting currents. The vessel shook violently with every arc of energy that struck its shields. Myra's eyes darted across her instruments, identifying patterns in the storms that could guide them. "The pulses aren't random," she said. "Follow the rhythm. The Crown knows the path." The crew moved as one, trusting not only the Crown's guidance but also their instincts and each other. They followed the pulses through the storms, every turn demanding attention, every moment a test of precision and coordination. Hours passed, yet the team did not falter. Humans thrived under challenge. They adapted, improvised, and overcame. Once through the storms, the rings opened into a vast expanse filled with floating crystalline structures, each reflecting light in a dazzling array. The crystals were enormous, towering hundreds of meters, and they shifted in subtle patterns that suggested intelligence. Alara stepped forward, examining the structures. "These are alive," she said softly. "They respond to thought, to action, to presence." The crystals pulsed faintly as the ship moved closer. Jonah adjusted the sensors, noting that the structures responded differently to each crew member. Myra observed that the crystals seemed to recognize Alara specifically, reacting to the warmth of the Crown. Terk felt a subtle hum in his chest, as if the structures were aware of his heartbeat. The crew realized they were not simply passing through a physical obstacle. They were entering a space that tested perception, empathy, and unity. Suddenly, a beam of light shot from one of the crystals, forming a barrier in front of the ship. The sensors indicated that the beam was neither harmful nor physical. It was a puzzle. Shapes and symbols appeared within the light, shifting continuously. Alara studied the patterns, her mind racing. "We need to solve this together. Everyone contribute what you know." Jonah began analyzing the symbols, finding patterns in the shifts. Myra compared the shapes to the signals they had seen throughout the journey. Terk adjusted the ship's position, aligning it with the energy flows. Step by step, they deciphered the puzzle, their efforts combining into a solution. As the final symbol aligned, the barrier dissolved and the ship moved forward. The crew realized that the trials were not random obstacles. They were a measure of human capability. Strength alone would not suffice. Courage without creativity would fail, and fear without trust would destroy them. Every decision, every observation, every shared thought was part of a greater test. As they approached the center of the rings, a colossal structure appeared, a luminous sphere suspended in space, larger than any planet. It pulsed with light and energy, radiating warmth that reached the ship even across the void. The signal that had guided them for so long originated from this sphere. Alara's crown glowed in response, resonating with the energy of the structure. The ship entered a docking port, carefully guided by the crown's pulses. Inside, they found a chamber of breathtaking scale. Light shifted continuously across the walls, forming images of countless worlds, civilizations, and species. The chamber was silent, yet full of presence. The energy in the room responded to thought, emotion, and action. The crew understood instinctively that this was the heart of the trial, the place where the galaxy would judge them, and where humanity would prove its worth. A voice, or perhaps an emotion, filled the chamber. It was not words, but a sensation, recognition, curiosity, and challenge combined. The message was clear. "What defines a species? What proves its worth?" Alara stepped forward, her voice steady. "Humans succeed because we think, because we act with purpose, because we care for one another and our world. We do not thrive by force alone. We thrive by creativity, by courage, by understanding. We face challenges together, using our minds, our hearts, and our unity." The chamber pulsed in response, and the images on the walls shifted to display the journey of the crew. The asteroid belt, the psychological illusions, the tests of foresight and reasoning. Every choice, every action, every moment of trust was displayed. The crown's warmth spread through the room, affirming their success. Jonah, Myra, and Terk stood beside Alara, their hearts swelling with pride. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and tests that challenged every skill they possessed. And they had succeeded, not through violence or force, but through human qualities: intelligence, adaptability, compassion, and unity. The sphere, or whatever intelligence controlled it, responded with a light so warm and golden that it filled the chamber with reassurance. The trials had been difficult, yet the purpose was clear: to measure the worth of humanity. They had passed. Alara turned to her crew. "We must return," she said. "Our mission is not yet complete. There are others watching, other tests to come, and countless worlds that need to see what humans can do." Terk grinned. "I think they already know we made it this far." Myra laughed softly. "They will know, but more importantly, we know what we are capable of." Jonah nodded. "Every choice, every risk, every problem solved, it all counts. Humans are more than we appear." The ship lifted off, leaving the luminous sphere and its rings behind. The stars outside seemed brighter, closer, as if acknowledging the small group that had moved through the trials and emerged victorious. Alara looked at her crown, feeling its warmth, and knew that it symbolized more than royalty. It symbolized human potential. The journey back to familiar space was filled with quiet reflection. The crew discussed the lessons they had learned, the value of observation, the power of unity, and the importance of acting with courage and creativity. Each trial had tested them, but each had also strengthened them, teaching skills no map or manual could convey. When they approached human-controlled space, they found themselves welcomed not only by familiar faces, but also by the recognition of other species who had been observing their journey. Envoys, scientists, and leaders came forward, acknowledging humanity's ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. The warmth of the crown, once mysterious, was now understood as a symbol of achievement. Alara addressed the gathering, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Humans are capable of great challenges, not because we are the strongest, but because we are resourceful, united, and willing to act with both heart and mind. We will continue to explore, to understand, and to prove that humanity belongs among the stars, not as conquerors, but as innovators, collaborators, and leaders of thought." Applause and recognition followed, yet Alara remained focused on the future. The galaxy was vast, full of mysteries, and humanity's journey had only begun. The tests had shown them the path, but the true work was yet to come. They would face more challenges, more unknowns, and more opportunities to demonstrate the qualities that made humans exceptional. The crew gathered one final time around the crown. Its warmth was steady, reassuring, a reminder of the journey, the trials, and the lessons learned. Each member felt a deep sense of pride, not for themselves, but for humanity. They had shown that humans could meet uncertainty with courage, solve impossible problems with creativity, and face the unknown with unity and heart. As the stars stretched endlessly ahead, the ship moved forward, carrying Princess Alara, her loyal crew, and the promise of humanity into the future. The galaxy had watched, and humans had not only survived, they had shone. The warmth of the crown was no longer a mystery. It was a beacon, a guide, and a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. The universe was vast and full of challenges, but humanity was ready. With courage, creativity, and unity, they could face anything. And as the ship sailed through the stars, the crew knew one truth above all: humans were not just survivors. They were pioneers, thinkers, and dreamers, capable of shaping the galaxy with their heart, mind, and spirit. And so the journey continued, not just for the crown, not just for Princess Alara, but for all of humanity. The stars awaited, mysteries beckoned, and the warmth of the crown remained as a reminder that humans, no matter how small they might seem in the cosmos, could rise to any challenge, overcome every test, and prove that their light would never fade in the universe. The human princess was missing, but her crown was still warm,